Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
There are a lot of times in life when you're humbled by what you don't know. I thought I knew about the history of the Green Bay Packers. I thought I had a good idea about the history of this great franchise, but I was wrong. This franchise has such a great amount of history, such a great amount of Hall of Fame players and coaches, an amazing fan base that I am just humbled. The Green Bay Packers, the franchise located in the smallest market in the NFL, has its hands in the history of this great league. From the amount of titles it has won, Green Bay is known as Title Town for a reason, to the fact that the Super Bowl trophy is named after the Packers coach who won the first two Super Bowls, Vince Lombardi. This account of the history of the Green Bay Packers doesn't do it justice at all. But that being said, listen to some of these facts concerning the Green Bay Packers. The Packers were founded on August the 11th and the 14th of 1919 in the editorial rooms of the Green Bay Press Gazette. The Indian Packing Corporation or Company of Green Bay sponsored the team for the first two seasons, hence the name Packers. On November 27, 1921, the Packers/Bears series, the longest in the NFL, began with the Packers losing to the then Chicago Staleys, the later Chicago Bears, 20-0. Many more games have been played in this series from that point on. On August 27, 1921, the American Professional Football Association granted Green Bay a team. In 1922, the Green Bay team was deeply in debt. Local football fans from the Elks Club started selling stock to save the team. This is why the Green Bay Packers are the only publicly owned NFL team in the league. Every year, the owners of this team meet at the stadium to talk about the state of the franchise, said to be worth over $2 billion now. Not too bad. It is soon after this that the Packers started to win title after title. In 1929, 1930, and 1931, 3 titles in a row. And listen to this, the rich keep getting richer. In 1935, the Packers signed Don Hutson, who would go on to set so many receiving records in his career that it would take decades before anyone gets close to breaking them. In 1936 and 1939, the Packers win their 4th and 5th titles, followed by a 6th title in 1944. During this run of greatness, there was one constant, Curly Lambeau. He coached the team from 1921 to 1949. His 209 wins, I should say, is the record for any Packer coach. He is so loved and so honored in Green Bay that the stadium where the Packers now play was renamed in Lambeau's honor in 1965. In 1959, the Packers make another great hire. This is the year that they signed Vince Lombardi to be both the head coach and their general manager. And this is when the Packers start winning once again. Listen to this. They win NFL championships in 1961, 1962, 1966, and 1967. In 1967, the Packers beat the Cowboys in a game that is now known as the Ice Bowl. And if you ever watched any of the videos of this Ice Bowl, it was an incredible game. It was also during the time that the AFL, NFL started playing each other in what would become known as the Super Bowl. The Packers would win Super Bowl 1 and 2. As a result, the Super Bowl trophy is now known as Lombardi's Trophy, named after the coach who won the first 2 Super Bowls. After Lombardi left the Packers, they went through a few years of mediocrity. That was until 3 great signings took place. In 1992, the Packers hire Mike Holmgren to be their head coach. Also in 1992, Ron Wolf, the GM for the Packers, traded a first-round pick to the Atlanta Falcons for a guy named Brett Favre, and I think that was a pretty good trade. Then in 1993, the Packers signed the most sought-after free agent of that year, and maybe all time, the great late Reggie White. All these great moves came together in 1997 when the Packers beat the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 31, and they made it to Super Bowl 32, where they lost to the Denver Broncos. The Packers would make it back to the Super Bowl in 2011, where they would beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are constant threats to win the Super Bowl every year due to great player moves and constant great quarterback play. Fun fact, the Lambeau Leap was invented in 1993 by Leroy Butler in a game against the Raiders. The Packers boast 26 Hall of Famers with a record as of 2019 of 754 wins, 574 losses, and 38 ties in the regular season, and 35 wins and 23 losses in the playoffs. I'm excited about this week's guest, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. In this interview, we will discuss why he loves the Packers, plus why the Packers are such a special team and so consistent over the past few years. If you want to be part of the Footballist Family podcast, please message me at Jeremy_McFarland on Twitter or on the Footballist Family Facebook page. Also, you can see all the other great podcasts that we have on our Sports History Network page. That is sportshistorynetwork.com, where you can see all the other great podcasts that we host on that page. Also, if you would, please subscribe to this podcast. Thank you, and enjoy this interview. We'd like to welcome everybody back to the Footballist Family podcast. And I have a special guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Would you please, my friend?
Yeah. My name is Tommy Phillips. I'm a writer, a Packers fan. I have written several books. A couple of those have been taken down because I'm redoing them. But the main ones that are still available are Nifty 90s, the stories of an amazing decade in pro football history. It's all about the NFL in the 90s, 1990 to 1999. And then I have my sequel to it, or it's actually kind of a prequel, which is Great 80s, A Journey Through Another Amazing Decade. A Journey Through Another Exciting Decade in pro football history. There it is. Man, so many words. But that's on a book on the NFL in the 80s. So those are my main two books, and they are pretty large. So it will take a long time to get to finish those books because they are very detailed.
I'm looking forward to reading the Great 80s. And I noticed that you had a book, and maybe I'm wrong on this, the tribute to Troy.
Yeah.
Now that is one that I'm going to track down and get as well. I enjoy listening to the history of the USC Trojans.
Well, I can always put it back up for sale. The reason why I had taken that down is I was thinking of trying to get it to a publisher, and I needed to make some changes in it if I wanted to try to get a publisher to pick it up. So that was what I was hoping to do, but certainly I can put that back up there. It hadn't sold very well, but it's got some pretty good pictures in it because I took a lot of pictures whenever I was out there in Los Angeles.
Well, that is, that's the type of book I enjoy, the picture book. In fact, I like the ones that, when you open the page, the picture pops up. Mm-hmm. I tell my wife that if she gave me a list, make it pop up pictures, I can do it a lot better than if she gave me a list. But I'm here, and we could talk about other things, but I'm here for one in particular book. You wrote a book, Packers versus the 49ers. Am I correct?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's a reason for that. If you're not seeing what I'm seeing, he's got a Green Bay Packers hat on, and I'm sure that anybody who's listening in Detroit or Chicago or Minnesota are probably cringing right now. Now, my question for you is why? Why are you a Packers fan?
It's a kind of complicated story, but I live in Pittsburgh, so obviously I should be a Steelers fan. Um, Basically, when I was a fourth grader or so, yeah, fourth grade, I think, um, I started getting into football, and I collected all those little football helmets out of the uh, machines where you could buy the little plastic helmet for a quarter. And yeah, one of those. Yeah. So um so I collected them all, and then I took like five of them, and I'm like, okay, these five, I'm gonna choose a team out of these five. And I didn't go with Pittsburgh, and I didn't go with the Rams. And then the two I'm very happy I didn't go with are the Raiders and the Jets. And
Oh,
I went with the Packers, and I, man, if I had gone with that Jets one, oh man, what they're going through right now. But yeah, I picked the Packers. I kind of like felt bad for them because all the books I read at the time were about the team in the 70s and the 80s, and they weren't very good then. So um, I I was like, I felt bad for them. And of course, as soon as I became a fan from them, then Brett Favre started winning MVPs, and it became this almost a dynasty of just great play for the last 25 years.
no, you didn't see that I had a helmet that he's talking about of the Houston Oilers, and I just so happened to find that in a drawer. And I was like, you know what, that kind of fits. If you can see behind me, kind of fits what I got going back here a little bit. The Love You Blue.
Right.
Now you brought up they did have a struggle from the 70s and the 80s. They weren't good, and I was looking today. They went through a bunch of coaches from that time when Vince Lombardi retired. Well, left them and went to the Redskins, which I don't think he should have ever gone to the Redskins, but that's my opinion. If I could throw out some coaches' names here, let's see if you can do word association with them. What is your first feeling when you hear these names? Okay, you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
Mike Holmgren.
Very smart, very good in scripting. That's the first thing I think of, is him scripting his first 15 or so. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
15 or so plays of every game, where he would figure out how to do an offense with I'm sorry, I my cat bothered me. I threw me off there. He would script the first 15 or so plays, and somehow he was able to get the offense to work, even though they were scripted, which I always thought was interesting, because it was like, well, what happens if you're in a 3rd and 10, you got a run call or something? And I never understood it, but he made it work. And I know he got that from Bill Walsh, and he was able to, he was just a very good play caller. That's probably the best word. I said a lot of words, but good play caller. That's what I'd go with.
All right. Vince Lombardi.
I'd say tough and brilliant and a great leader. I had the fortune of hearing some stories about Vince Lombardi. I went on this Packers cruise thing where old players told stories about him, and it was just an amazing man. I mean, um, he did so much more than just football for those players. So yeah, uh, it's hard to put into words what he meant to Green Bay as a whole.
Dan Devine.
All I can think of is 1972. Whenever they won the division, I still haven't covered the 70s yet. I'm working on that, but yeah, that was the only good year was 72 of the 70s for the Packers. It was 70s and 80s. They had only 2 playoff appearances, only 1 division championship. That was in 72. And the funny thing, and even when they did make the playoffs in the 80s, which was after he was gone, it was only because it was a strike year. So the NFL only played 9 games that season. So reasons to think they may not have even made the playoffs that year had had the NFL played all 16 games.
I tell my kids.
Many things.
I tell my kids my favorite way of winning is by default. You don't know. Now,
yeah.
Now you're a historian, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and the very fact I threw in Dan Devine to give you a little curveball to see where I can go with this next one, and you got it. Now, you studied the 80s, you studied the 90s. Let's go back to the 40s. Okay. Don Hutson. What can you tell? There's a lot of people that don't know who he is or was. Obviously, he's not alive now, but he came from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
He really well. I'm going to let you describe Don Hutson for us. So people can understand. He played for the Packers. So go ahead.
Yeah. He was pretty much the Jerry Rice of his day. As a receiver, he completely revolutionized the position. He caught 99. I'm not sure if it was all 99 receiving touchdowns. I know he scored 99 touchdowns, and I think they were all receiving because Steve Largent broke that record, I think, in 1989 with 100. He held so many league records at his retirement, and those records didn't get broken until Steve Largent came around, and then later Jerry Rice. And as we found out, is that he still holds the Packers record for most catches in a game. Devontae Adams tied him earlier this year. Yeah, but Don Hutson had 14 in a game, and that's still the standard, although Adams tied him earlier this year. So that is impressive.
I found I have a book here, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's the Pro Football Hall of Fame 50th anniversary, and there's a picture here of Don Hutson catching a pass. And if you it says here that he caught 99 career touchdown receptions, and by the time he retired, he caught 488 passes. The second place receiver had caught 190.
Yeah.
Now that tells you something right there, where their idea was running the ball, and the Packers said, no, we're going to throw it to this guy, and good luck stopping him. Now I remember when Steve Largent broke the record. I remember watching that game. It took 40 some odd years to break that record. That tells you something about Don.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I have a recent book where a Packers fan, ranked the top 100 Packers of all time, and he was ranked number one. So um, that that says a lot. Then he's ahead of Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, all of them.
Could his game translate into today's NFL?
Well, you know, I mean, probably not at the level of like his size, and I'm not sure what size he was. Obviously he would have to keep up with modern day training methods, but his style of play, yeah, I think he pretty much set the standard for how a all-time receiver is. And he was all so far ahead of every other receiver at the time. So in today's game, I think he fit right in there. Now, maybe he'd have to change his game plan because, um, you know, I haven't seen any games from the 40s, but back then they used to, whenever they pass along. And today's game, a lot of we see Drew Brees and Tom Brady do all the short passes, and they make their money doing that. But I could see him going downfield and catching 60-yard passes from Aaron Rodgers. So, yeah, I think he could make it in today's NFL if he was up to the the training and that kind of stuff.
Now you brought up Aaron Rodgers, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to ask you, Rodgers or Favre, which one would you start tomorrow?
Oh, I thought this out a long time ago. I thought, okay, if I want one season, then I'm going to go with Brett Favre because I know it doesn't matter how how big the hits he takes, he's going to go through. He's not going to get knocked out. But if I had one game to win, I would want Aaron Rodgers, um, and the Super Bowl that he won against the Steelers uh, kind of proves that, because the Packers had absolutely no running game in that Super Bowl. In fact, uh, I knew how the Super Bowl was going to go down because of their inactive list, because they made both of their fullbacks inactive. So I was like, okay, that means they're going to pass a lot in this game. Well, they had maybe one good run the entire game. It was all up to Rodgers, and so Rodgers had to win that game on his own pretty much, because he didn't have a running game and he was going up against a great Steelers offense. So yeah, if you give me one game to win that I need to win, I take Rodgers.
Now that is what we call the political answer. You straddled the fence, and hey. But the funny thing is, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Yeah. I would not start Brett Favre if my life depended on it, but if I had a season, Favre would be the guy.
Yeah.
He would be. And it still doesn't look right for me to think of him in a purple uniform.
Yeah.
But, that's just my opinion. But anyway, now we're talking about Favre and we're talking about Rodgers. We talked about Vince Lombardi. If you had you have this big slab of granite, okay? And you had somebody who knew how to carve that granite into faces. And you can make your own Mount Rushmore, Mount Phillips, okay? Who would be the 4 Packers you would put up there? It could be players or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to go with the founder, Curly Lambeau. You have to go with Vince Lombardi as coach. I would go with Bart Starr as quarterback. And oh man, the last one, there's just so many choices. I would have to go with
Don Mikowski.
no. I want to say Reggie White, but he didn't spend his whole career with Green Bay, so I probably would go with Don Hudson. I think.
Okay.
I know it would be all old guys, but that's when they had their most success. So yeah.
It would be the founder, and I'm going to ask you a question about that in just a second. I was thinking if you had the Magic Man, you'd have to put his mullet in it somehow. It's epic. I enjoy looking at the pictures of him. He knew what he was doing. He had the business up front, the party in the back. I love it. Why don't the Packers have an owner?
Well, honestly, I would have to go back and read the exact way this team was set up, because it's been a long time since I read. I had a book that was all about the Packers. I mean, I still have it, but it explained every last thing about them. I learned so much about them, but the problem is I've forgotten so much of it too. So I couldn't tell you the actual answer to that. I can say that it's so unique in sports that a team doesn't have a one singular owner. I mean, they do have a CEO in Mark Murphy, who funny thing is there was a Mark Murphy who played for the Packers, but that's not the Mark Murphy who is the CEO of the Packers. And it is very special being the one team in all sports that doesn't have one person leading the team.
I want to tell you something funny here, and I've got a question for you before I do that. In the background, underneath your Penn State flag, is that a nesting doll, a Brett Favre nesting doll?
Yes, it is.
Okay, just checking. That is awesome. I've never seen that. I live outside of a town called Waverly, Tennessee. You cannot get there from where you are. You just can't. And I go to get my oil changed and tires rotated at a place called Waverly Tire and Auto. And the guy there, his name is Dan Schofield, and he is not from around here. You hear how slow I talk. He does not talk this slow. So I asked him, I said, "Where are you from?" And he told me, and as I was looking up on the wall, he had a shareholder stake. He bought a share from the Packers. There is a share, symbol there in Waverly, Tennessee, the Packers. Do you own a share in the Packers?
Yes, I do. I bought one in 2011 when they opened up sales for them again. I don't think I have it in this room, but yeah, I kind of do have a frame too. I do have my share of the team. I know there's a lot of people who have shares, but I like to say that I'm allowed to say we when I describe the Packers, because I am technically an owner of the team.
Now, see that? There you go. You need to have an owner's booth and everything. It's just interesting when you do a little research on the Packers, that they're the only publicly traded company in the NFL. And when I think in 2011, you said they were building onto the stadium and they had to raise funds that way. It is if I remember correctly, Lambeau Field is the oldest stadium in the NFL.
Actually, Soldier Field is.
Okay, Soldier Field.
Soldier Field is older, but it doesn't look anything like what it was. Okay.
There's something about that stadium. My friend went up there and watched the Titans play, and he said that stadium just has a feel about it. And
Yeah. I got to go to Lambeau Field in 2015. It was my first trip up there. Uh, yeah, and I got to take a tour of it and everything. It's just an amazing experience. I'd recommend it to most people, but I wouldn't recommend it to my Steelers friends because I know I know that wouldn't turn out well. But I do wish I had seen the stadium back the way it was in the '90s. Because way it was in the '90s, it was a classic bowl,
yes,
and you could see you could see out the stadium. Now it's all built up really tall in order to maximize ticket sales, and now it's a completely different stadium than it once was. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's just that I wish I had had that opportunity to sit in the stadium the way it looked back when the Ice Bowl was being played back in those days. So, yeah, there a lot of good things about it, but that's a little disappointment I have.
Now, I've got a couple more questions, and I'll let you go. I
Yeah,
appreciate your time, Mr. Tommy.
yeah.
Now, I watched something on the NFL Network about the people who live across from Lambeau Field, and they said that they were receiving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of offers for those houses.
Mhm.
And I just thought, it would be neat to live that close to the stadium of the team you like, but at the same time, you could buy a couple houses for what they're offering.
Yeah.
But that is pretty neat. I don't think that there's a team in the NFL quite like the Packers. With the first day of training camp, they ride bikes to the
Mhm.
training camp,
Yeah.
and I just don't think there's a team like it. And it's funny how you became a fan by looking at mini helmets. Do you still have that mini helmet?
Probably. Yeah, I wanted to say something. If you've never been to Green Bay, it is so much smaller than you'd ever imagine. I mean, I live in a small town myself, but it's bigger than Green Bay. And like the Green Bay, as soon as you uh, turn off the road that the stadium is in, you're already out of Green Bay. And in fact, up until they started doing some building up there, the new Titletown district they call it. Uh, there are no hotels in Green Bay. So when we went up there, we had to stay an entire hour out of Green Bay, all the way down in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, because there's just no. It's completely different. It's like driving up to a small town and having a big football stadium sitting in the middle of it. That's how unique it is.
Now, it is the smallest NFL town,
Mm,
but it has several years worth of waiting list for season tickets.
yeah.
Um, it's fans. You mentioned the Jets. You have to be a rabid fan to be a Jets fan or
Yeah.
a Browns fan. And for Packers, I think you have to be a rabid fan to sit through that cold weather to watch a football game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I respect the history of the Packers. You cannot write the history of the NFL without the history of the Packers. And one last story. Today on Total Pro Sports, they had a video of the top 5 best Super Bowl rings, the top 5 worst Super Bowl rings.
Mm.
Interesting fact, Super Bowl III was the first Super Bowl to mention Super Bowl. The first 2 were world
Mhm.
champions. The first
Right.
ring of the Packers was so simple, yet so beautiful, and it
Yeah.
says world champions. And I believe every Super Bowl ring that came from there has world champions on it instead of Super Bowl champions because of your
Mm.
Packers.
Mm.
Um, And then they had the second one, but the one that Aaron Rodgers won is a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I have replicas of their rings, and I am pretty sure the Packers were the first football team with a ring, not in '66 for the Super Bowl one, but for 1961 when they won the NFL championship over the Giants. And they got a ring for that. The next year they beat the Giants in the championship again, and they decided we don't need rings. We already got one. So there isn't a 1962 ring except for maybe a few players who joined the team that year. So the Packers have 1961 and 1965 World Championship rings that go along with their 4 Super Bowl rings. So the Packers technically have 6 rings and, of course, 13 championships.
No, you got to drop the 13 in there, don't you? And I'm looking at the Titans, their Titans display case, and there's nothing in there. But we'll catch up with you one day. We'll catch up with you. I've got space in this office for a couple of things for the Titans. Mr. Tommy, I appreciate you coming on. Where can they get a hold of you if they want to buy your book?
Go to TommyAPhillips.com, or other ways of getting there are nifty90s.com or great80s.com. Those will all lead you to the same place, and you can find my books there, and you can contact me there.
Now, I have one last question. I just saw it. If you can own one thing from the Packers' history, what would it be?
I think I'd want to own one of the goalposts from the Ice Bowl in 1967. I know they tore those down after the game, so there probably are people who own parts of that goalpost that was there on a day that was minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is very specific. I like that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us at Football is Family.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.